Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This week, my guest is Mickie Kennedy, and he is the founder and president of eReleases. Welcome, Mickie.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, Mickie, tell me, give us your background, give us your story.
Sure. About 27 years ago, I was finishing up a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing with an emphasis in poetry. And my game plan was to write poetry and wait tables. And I did that for a summer after graduating. And I got to tell you, it's hard being on concrete 10, 12-hour days. And it frazzles your mind. And so I am like the most sympathetic person to like servers. It's just, I tried it. I couldn't do it. So I realized I needed a safe office job. And so I applied and got hired at a telecom research startup in Washington, D.C. I was employee number 3. They saw that I had writing on my resume, and they said, write press releases and send them out to the media, figure that out. And so I sent out a few. They didn't do much. And we published a lot of interesting data, but I started asking questions like, hey, why is this one country in the Caribbean account for more telecom traffic to and from the United States than all other countries combined in the Caribbean area? And they're like, oh, let's look into that. And it turned out it was like the center of 1-900 numbers at the time, which were really popular. You could call for 75 minutes to a horoscope line or get some advice for just someone to hold your hand if you're lonely. And so I put that story together and the data and sent it out. And we got picked up in The Economist, Financial Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all with that original press release. And we were faxing at the time. And I noticed a trend over the next couple of months that as I was faxing these stories, a lot of journalists would call and say, hey, could you email these in the future? And I was like, yeah, that's a lot easier than programming a fax machine and hitting send and waiting all day for that screeching sound to eventually get these releases over. I mentioned that to my boss, and I said, if you could get everybody's email address, all journalists, you could just blast them press releases. He goes, yeah, there might be a business there. In my downtime, which wasn't considerable, working for a startup, I did just reach out and network with journalists and ask if I could email them press releases. And 27 years ago, it was a different thing. There was these databases out there. So almost all of them said yes, as long as I kept it related to their beat. And I launched a little over 25 years ago, October 1998, with 10,000 journalists in my database. And I was just a matchmaker, sending releases to journalists that I thought would be a good fit. And over the years, PR Newswire reached out to me and said, hey, we like what you're doing. Is there any way you could support us? And I was like, I'd love for our releases to go over the wire, but I know that you guys charge $1,600 for a national distribution. And they were like, maybe we could do a local distribution. And I'm like, no, these small businesses deserve to get like national pickup. And so we went back and forth. And since then, every release that goes through eReleases gets a national distribution on PR Newswire. And instead of paying $1,600 for a 600-word press release, it's like a third of that through us. So it's considerable savings going through us than it is to go directly through the wire. And we also have a few bonus additional services that you get with eReleases that you wouldn't get if you went directly to the wire. We really are providing a really great value for small businesses, startups, speakers, authors, all different types of people that are basically small and medium-sized businesses. And it's always exciting seeing the successes and learning from them. But I also see a lot of releases that don't do well. And most of those are people who are looking for someone to distribute their release. They've already written it. And by the time it gets to us, they've got this release that is just not newsworthy at all. It's been approved and they want it to go out. And my job is to then take them after that release goes out and educate them on the types of releases they should be doing, the more strategic ones that will get meaningful, we call earned media. And that's when a journalist writes an article about you. We don't want the press release replicated on a bunch of websites. That's syndication. That happens with all the wires, but the real goal is to have a journalist write an article about you. It's a huge credibility boost. It's like third-party corroboration when a journalist writes about you. It's almost like an implied endorsement. And it really is a signal of trust. And so if you read about a company in an article, you really usually get a warm feeling and wow, that seems like a really great company. That never happens with an ad. We're blind to ads. And that's the real value of earned media, is that emotional response that you get. I myself am guilty of reading blog posts or newsletters or articles about Kickstarter campaigns. And I'm like, wow, this person's journey to create what they feel is a unique product that no one has created yet. I'm like, yes, I just click through and I usually back them if it's affordable. And that is the natural thing that happens with earned media. And it's very powerful, not only for getting new customers, but you can take that same article and put it in front of your customers, put it in front of your leads, take that link to the article and put it in your social media, put it in your newsletters. And the reason for that is there are always customers who are shopping around or thinking that they need to shop around just to make sure they're with the right company. They read an article like that, they get that same warm and fuzzy emotional response, and they're like, yeah, we don't need to shop this year. We're with the right company. And you also have a certain amount of leads, depending on the space. It could be like 90% of your leads never convert. And maybe you get an additional 10% of those to convert by getting that article in front of them reading it, getting that warm and fuzzy response. And it's just enough to get them over the hump and do business with you. So that's the real value of earned media. You want to record it on your website, take screenshots of the article. Eventually, these articles disappear. Newspapers, especially, are always changing their content management system, their CMS. And so they usually purge old articles and just start fresh. So you want to make sure that you've preserved them, you put them on your website, you've shared them with your people. When you've got those logos on your website and you've got ideally a newsroom, it is also a big trust factor. I remember my daughter sent me a website for Christmas one year. She wanted me to buy something. And I looked at it and I was like, the website looked really old. I don't know. I didn't know about doing business with them, but I looked, they had a newsroom and they had like 12 years of press releases. And I'm like, no scammer is going to go through the effort of recording 12 years of their chronology. So I felt very comfortable pulling out my credit card and using it there. So these are all the trust signals that are really valuable that come as a result of earned media. And it is one of the things that a lot of small businesses don't realize is there, or they think it's only available for large companies, funded companies.
And that's what I was going to ask you, Mickie. In doing these press releases and these articles and stuff, what are some of the things that a business would do one for, or what would the subject be?
So a lot of people do releases as they launch, and I think that's really good. The thing there is make sure you tell your story. A lot of small businesses like to appear very corporate and they don't get personal. And you got to realize that we are people who like to do business with other people. We don't like doing business with corporate names and logos and stuff like that. We want a connection. And that's one of the valuable things that you can do with your story. Talk about your journey to create the business or to create a product. There's a reason that almost everybody that appears on Shark Tank opens with usually a vulnerability. They share their path to create this product. Maybe they were laid off and they had a hobby and they were wondering, could I create a business here? Or they lost a spouse and it was all on them, and they pulled this thing out and developed it. It's all sharing that human interest element. And that is so strong and so powerful. Journalists are naturally storytellers, and they like articles that have a story arc. And so if you write your press releases from the standpoint of incorporating elements of a story arc, you can do really well. For example, one of the most popular releases we get is a product launch. And it usually consists of, here's a new product, here's a bullet list of features, and here's a page dedicated to learn more and buy. That's really difficult for a journalist to create a story arc there. But if you incorporated maybe some data to anchor it and really set the stakes, for example, maybe you have some logistics software that's useful for people who are in the business of e-commerce and shipping physical package. And maybe you pull a quote out that's just publicly available that 67% of new businesses in your space fail within the first 5 years, often because they can't get the logistics prices under control. And here's a solution. And then you can introduce a use case study. Here's a company that tried it. This is what they were facing before. This was the outcome. Here's a quote by them talking about how great it was. All of those are elements of telling a little story. And by going back and putting that in the press release, you'll have much better success. And I've talked a little bit about strategic types of releases as opposed to the ones that don't work. The most common release we get at eReleases is a new hire. And it's usually not an executive, and it's usually not an industry veteran. And I'm telling you, don't waste money putting those releases on the wire. Reach out to your local newspaper, reach out to your local business magazine or newspaper if you're lucky enough to have one, and maybe a trade publication that has an on the move section. Just send them the photo of the new hire, what their new position is, and a couple sentences about them, because that's really all you're going to get. Don't waste money on the wire for something like that, because it's not going to do very well. But releases that I feel are strategic and do very well are those that are data driven. I have some clients that are really good at finding publicly available data in their industry and just putting one release, and it just makes them have so much authority. It's not their data, but they're the first to put it together and tell a story using that data, and that works really well. You can also, create your own data. First person data is really important and strong, and it generally gets media attention. One of the things that I always do when I have a client that's reluctant or discouraged is, let's do a survey in your industry. And it's literally coming up with 16 interesting questions that are relevant today. It can be looking at trends in your industry. It could be looking at post-pandemic. Are you having culture problems in the workplace? Are you having trouble having people not want to work in the office, or hybrid situation? Those are questions that you could ask your industry. And I like to put 4 questions per page in SurveyMonkey. You get a link, and then you approach a small or independent trade association in your industry. Believe me, they're out there. You'd be shocked at how many small and independent ones are out there. Ask them if they'll send that link to their members in exchange for you mentioning them in a press release you'll be issuing over the wire to get some media attention. I think that works about 80–85% of the time. You might have to go to a second one if that one doesn't work. Sometimes they'll push back and say, could we co-brand the survey? I don't see a problem with that. They're just looking for a little more visibility and a little more attention. The small and independent trade associations don't get a lot of love from the media, so they will often see this as a win, where the large trade associations get all the press and they're not going to cooperate. But really, you're looking for 100 responses. You're going to analyze those responses and try to figure out what 2 or 3 questions, sometimes even 1 question is important enough, or surprises or aha moments. And you're going to focus a press release where you tell a story about the results of that and provide quotes by you with some analysis of why you felt the numbers skewed that way. And generally, when I walk someone through the survey method, we often get as many as 8 to 14 earned media articles that a journalist wrote, original articles that are out there. If you build out a page on your website where you put all 16 questions and answers and link to that in the press release and provide a resource page, often they'll link to that as well, which is a valuable link that goes back to you. And sometimes journalists can go in there and look at those questions that you didn't focus on and find another story. And that might be another opportunity for another press release to get some more attention. But this always works. The least we've ever had is 4 media pickups that I've walked people through with this method. And if you've ever hired a PR firm, most of them offer 0 guarantee. And I deal with people who have worked with PR firms for an entire year and really got no earned media to speak of. And yet here is a foolproof, ironclad way to get several earned media pickups. Takes a little bit of work, but it's not as difficult as it seems. It really is a matter of just coming up with great questions you might ask if you were at a conference, other people in your industry. Hey, have you noticed this trend in the industry? Or people taking 90 to 120 days to pay where it used to be net 30. Things like that could indicate a signal of money tightening in the industry. So all of these things can really help to create a story. And it's just asking questions and figuring out which ones percolate to the top and are interesting.
So now a lot of the things that you're talking about are on the wire and things like that are more national. So for the small business owner, I'm going to say that the mom and pop place, the more local businesses and stuff like that, how can they use the press releases? Because again, if I have something that I want to tell, or I want to have something put out about my nonprofit that I have going, I don't necessarily want that to hit national because I'm not looking for that. So how can I use that in my business and local?
So local media, whenever anyone calls and asks about that, and that's all that they're looking for, I tell them good news. They don't have to spend any money with eReleases. You can do this yourself. And again, it seems daunting, but if you break it down, there are probably less than 10 people in your market that potentially could write about you. 10. That's very doable to build a relationship with 10 people. You're going to find out in your local paper who covers your industry or the types of stories that you're thinking about. You're going to get their email address. If you can't find it online, just call and ask. These are not celebrities. They are members of the community, and they're looking for tips. They're looking for stories. They will give you their email address. I know that a lot of people feel uncomfortable asking for it, but it really is, they really are looking to communicate. And then if you're lucky enough to have a business magazine or newspaper, or sometimes you can have both, like in Baltimore, we're pretty lucky that there's a few publications out there. You're going to get the email address for the person who writes about your industry there. Are there community papers? You don't think about it, but these free weeklies are sometimes opportunities. They're usually ad rich and content poor. And so if you could approach them with content, they'll often plug it in and you'll get a mention as well. I've had a lot of clients that have been able to get columns in some of these weekly free papers, a dentist who provides some resources, a contractor who provides some, handyman tips, and he usually builds it around seasonal. Both of them do it monthly, even though it's a weekly. So they're just obligated to do, I think, 11 to 12 of these columns a year. So it's very doable for someone to go out and do a little bit of education, find what are some tips that I could provide as a professional or someone in that space. Also, look at who is the editor there. And as you have ideas, you're going to send them a pitch. You don't have to write a press release. It really is just a few sentences and a quote. I always love putting a great quote in the pitch because journalists can build an entire article around an amazing quote. And by amazing quote, it's just few things. It could be like you're a wordsmith and you said something beautiful and eloquent, or it could just be that you said something that was paraphrased so powerful that if they were to take that quote and just paraphrase it, there'd be that loss of concision. So you just want it to be like meaningful. You don't want to say something that's safe. You want to be as specific as possible. And it really is a place to shine. If you're willing to be contrarian on a subject, that can work really well. That's where you're going against what everybody else thinks in a particular industry. That works so well because generally people are all trying to join the message that everybody else is saying. And it's hard to stand out if everybody's saying how great electric cars are for the environment. But if you're the one person who raises his hand and says, hey, not so fast, the mining of these minerals is like not good for the environment, the labor problems with children working in mines, we haven't solved what we're going to do with all these batteries at the end of their life. Are we just creating more problems? Maybe we should put this on hold for a few years until we figure that out. And that's a way to be rational but contrarian. And every time a journalist covers that subject of electric cars, you stand the likelihood of being put in there because they like to be fair and balanced, but often they go to press with only one side because no one's raised their hand and said, I'm a contrarian. I'm going to give you a con viewpoint on this. So that's a really great way to stand out as well. And so once you've built your little Rolodex of up to 10 people in your market, and it can include TV and radio, if there's programming that occasionally spotlights local businesses, you're going to reach out to them, get their email address, but you're going to ask for the booker or producer of that segment rather than the writer. And you're just going to email these people as you have ideas. I say, really, if you're not doing it quarterly, reach out, do some research, look at industry trends. Sometimes what works really well is if you're at a conference and you get the names of a lot of competitors, but they're in other markets, just following them on Google Alerts can really give you some ideas. If they get published an article about them in that market, you could potentially turn that idea in a pitch to your local media. Never tell them that I saw this in another market, right? But you're going to say, hey, I've noticed a trend in my industry where the media is talking about this subject, and I feel like I'd be a really great example. I'm in the community. This is what we're doing in response to these movements, and here's a great quote. And generally, as you have these ideas, pitch them, send them out to these journalists. And what you find is you may not get anything the first 6 months, but generally what happens is after a while, you will be on their mind and they're going to be working on a story and they're going to be looking for a local business to plug in and they're going to remember you. And
Right.
what often happens is after a period of time, like maybe a year or so, they're reaching out to you on a regular basis to plug you into stories. And that's the real value of making these connections. And it really is some of the easiest media to get. Now, I will tell you that the local weekly free papers, they are going to try to sell you ads. So you just have to be harsh and just say, no,
Right.
I'm not looking to advertise. I'm just looking to provide content and go from there.
Again, you talked about at the beginning, we talked about how when you first started out, it was sending the fax with the press release, and then it's evolved where it's email and you have your Rolodex and everything else. Where do you see the future of the press release PR industry going?
I think that it may be a few more years, but I think that there's a natural evolution of people consuming through video. I think that I don't know that the press release is going to be all video, but I do think that there's going to be more collateral that's going to be accompanying press releases that are video. And I think that you're going to find a lot of media wanting to work with B-roll and footage and things like that so that they can create a video story. That being said, right now, making sure that you include photos with your press release is a really great way to stand out, because if a journalist is looking at two potential articles and one's got really good photos and the other one has no photos, they know that their online audience is going to appreciate having photos to engage and attract them to the copy. So that's another way to stand out. And again, it doesn't have to be a professional photo. Really candid shots, often with your product, people using it, work really well. You don't have to overthink this and be perfectly super professional and things like that. Journalists like to spotlight smaller businesses. They really like to bring new discoveries to their audience. And often they don't come from the Microsofts and Googles of the world. They're usually smaller companies, often mom and pops and startups. Don't think that aren't worthy of getting media attention. Journalists really do get the most accolades for the little companies and tools and services that no one knows about. And as a result, they really are seeking those out. Don't feel that you don't potentially matter because of your size, because you really do stand a really good chance as being small, as long as you're unique or doing something that's a little bit different than everybody else.
So, Mickie, what have I not asked you that you wish I had?
Let's see. I think we did a pretty good overview of everything, but one thing that I can talk about is that there's a lot of social media using press releases. I follow somebody on TikTok called Snackalator, and they do a roundup each week of new snacks hitting the retail shelves. And they say all of these images, we haven't seen it in the market yet, but all of these images come from press releases. And so people are getting their media from different places, and you don't have to do a different process for reaching people on social media. As long as you're using a wire, like our partner is PR Newswire, you're getting out there and available to a lot of different types of media, including social media, including bloggers and people that you may not normally think of as media.
Right. Great. Mickie, if people like what they hear and they want to reach out to you and eReleases, how can they reach out to you guys?
So our website's eReleases.com. All my social media is on the lower right. Feel free to call our office or email or chat. We have no salespeople. It's just editors. They're completely empowered to tell you if they don't think they can help you or turn you in a different direction. For example, if you're looking for local media, we're not going to take your money. We're going to try to steer you towards learning how to do it yourself. And to that aim, I have a free masterclass that does talk about the local media angle as well as strategic types of releases. And it's completely free. It's a great place for anybody who's open to learning more about PR to start there, because you'll probably walk away with half a dozen really strong strategic ideas for your business. And it's less than an hour-long video. I made it short because people's attention spans are short. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a 12-hour class and said, I'll get to it next week, and I never get to it. It's available at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN, and again, completely free. I'm looking for people to do more strategic releases because I know they'll have more happy stories and they'll get that earned media that they're looking for.
Great. Mickie, I really appreciate your time today. And I think that our listeners have learned a lot from this and be able to use this in their businesses. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
All right. This week, my guest was Mickie Kennedy, and he is the founder and president of eReleases. I will see you guys next week.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.